Well, good evening. Okay, attention, attention. Good evening. We're running about 15 minutes late, so I'm sorry. Little delays tonight. At any rate, welcome to the final meeting of Torch for this year. This concludes our 92nd year of Torch, so only 8 more years to the centennial. I'm Howard Dooley, president, and this is my last stand, so I'll be glad to pass the torch, literally, to Tom Dietz shortly. So first thing, are there any guests with us tonight that we would like to introduce? Could I start on the left, since Andy is over at this table? No guests. Secondly, oh, there we are, Gary and others.
This is my wife, Cynthia. She came to join us today, and I've introduced her before, so you should be well aware of her.
Welcome back, Cynthia.
My wife, Linda Ginsburg. You've seen a lot.
Well, since the last meeting was a splendid presentation just a meeting ago. Welcome back, Linda. Dave McMurrow.
My guest tonight is Gurnam Gill, a longtime neighbor and friend, and he is a retired microbiologist from Pfizer, formerly known as Pharmacia, formerly known as Upjohn. So, a delightful friend.
Welcome. Welcome. Any guests here? All regulars, and I don't think any regular guests here. Okay, so welcome guests and members for the final meeting. Tonight we have what's become a tradition over maybe about the last half dozen years of having a panel to discuss what might be a current issue. And as we all know, the last 2 years have been an extraordinary time. Nothing quite like this since 1918. And just this week, we have hit or will hit the 1 million number for deaths due to COVID. So tonight we have a special panel convened and organized and by GIllian Stoltman, one of our esteemed members. And I like to think this panel and GIllian are a perfect exemplar of the extraordinary expertise and experience we have among our membership. Whatever the issue, there is somebody among us or several who really have knowledge, deep knowledge about the subject. So I'd like to introduce GIllian, and then she will introduce the panel she has convened and actually assembled for tonight. So GIllian Stoltman is listed as currently, are you hearing me? I thought somebody was saying something. Okay, GIllian has tremendous expertise in the field of public health and biology, specifically communicable diseases and immunization. GIllian came to Kalamazoo from England. GIllian is an alumna of the University College London with a degree in microbiology and then a PhD from the University of London in viral pathology. She has served our community and the state of Michigan a long time as a director of community health for the Kalamazoo County Human Services Department, and then later for the Kalamazoo, she was the health officer and director of the Kalamazoo County Health and Community Services Health Officer. She continues to be a consultant to various agencies and in public health. And GIllian is also currently a community associate professor in the Department of Biomedical Sciences at the Stryker College of Medicine, just down the street, part of the WMU, and continues to be a consultant in public health and health policy. So she's organized a panel, which seems ever more timely, for tonight of 3 of our other members, who I will leave it to GIllian to introduce.
Thanks, Howard. Yep. So as Howard said, today, this past week, we passed quite a milestone in COVID, with 1 million deaths as a result of this infection, and that's just in this country. Certainly beyond that, we've seen huge numbers of deaths around the world. And I think one of the really sad things is CDC recently estimated that at least a third and maybe more of those deaths could have been prevented if we'd had a much greater uptake of the vaccine, which, as I think everybody here knows, that one of the primary vaccines used in this country and around the world is the Pfizer vaccine, a very safe, very effective vaccine. But for reasons that I think we will start to explore this evening, not everybody seemed to agree that the vaccine was going to be the way out of this pandemic. And that, in fact, is what's happened. We should be much further on in fighting this infection than we are now. The fact that there were so many people who were unvaccinated led to greater opportunities for the virus to mutate and change, which is why we have all these variants out there that are springing up around the world. People had been vaccinated, that the virus would never have had the chance to mutate. So the emphasis on what we're going to address this evening is not so much the science. The science is pretty straightforward about coronavirus and the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the one that's responsible for COVID-19. Certainly we're learning a lot more about coronavirus than we ever thought we would. But the basics we have a good understanding of. I think what this pandemic has demonstrated more than anything else is that there's a lot about human behavior that we don't know about. And I think that has some really significant implications for how we, particularly in this country, address future pandemics and future emergencies. And I think that that's something that we'll get round to talk about tonight. I think the other thing that kind of stunned me was to see how differently the response was in this country compared to a lot of other countries. I'm going to refer to my notes because I don't always keep numbers well in my brain. But when we look globally and we look at how did other countries do in terms of getting their populations, their communities vaccinated, there's a good correlation between per capita GDP and levels of vaccination. Just let me give you a couple of examples. In a lot of Western countries, Germany, France, the UK, and Canada, I'll call it Canada being a Western country, they have GDPs per capita somewhere between $40,000 and $53,000. Their vaccination rates were all up between 75 and 83%. And this is what we see typically across westernized countries around the world. Doesn't matter where you look. the United States has a vaccination rate. And when I say vaccination, I mean fully. You know, you got one dose of the J&J vaccine, 2 doses of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine. The United States has 66, 67% vaccination rate, and yet our GDP per capita is $60,000. We are way, way out of line with everybody else in terms of that. And in fact, countries that had GDPs per capita around the $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 per year, Laos, Bangladesh, Iran, had higher rates of vaccination than we did. I'm going to leave it to the economists to work out why that is so different. Those countries where they are what we would generally consider so very, very poor, but they managed to treat their populations and protect them much better than we did. So the question I think that we all need to think about as we look at this pandemic is not what have we learned about the science. Of course, for those of us who are interested in that sort of thing, it's great, it's interesting. We'll spend hours poring over the, different antigens and different antibodies and stuff like that. But the big question, I think, as a community that we have to deal with is, how has our culture handled this? How has our media handled this? And how have our politicians and our communities handled that? So tonight we've got 3 people who are willing to, fortunately, to share their perceptions of how we as communities have responded to this pandemic as communities. We've got 3 people who they may not consider themselves experts, although they certainly have a wealth of knowledge. We have Frank Cody, who is an academic, an educator, and interestingly, and this was a piece I didn't know until I looked him up, actually spent some time in Wuhan, China, which is where the pandemic is believed to have originated. So that was something that I gleaned after I'd asked Frank to talk on this. Secondly, excuse me, Connie Turner, who's a graphic artist and creative designer. Is that fair, Connie? Who's going to talk about her perceptions of how the media has presented a lot of the information that people need to know in order to make good decisions about how to protect themselves. And then our third panelist is Jack Urban, who has got a great insight, although Jack's a chemical engineer. Maybe I shouldn't say although. Jack is a chemical engineer by training, but we all know him for his service as both a county commissioner and a city commissioner, and so understands the ins and outs of local politics and what drives local politicians to make the decisions that they do. So with that, I'll ask the 3 panelists if you would come forward, and we've got some chairs here. And then, Frank, if you wouldn't mind going first, that would be great. And is this mic live? Okay, and this one I need to turn off?
Good evening, everybody. I didn't know anybody knew about my trip to Wuhan. Yeah. That's interesting. What other secrets do you know, huh? Well, I took the tack as a former teacher and administrator of schools. That seemed to be my bailiwick compared to other things I could talk about. And my interest was in seeing, first of all, what COVID did to at the level of schools, universities, I did not end up speaking to an elementary school teacher, but what I did to find that out, the answer to the question what was going on with their lives as teachers, is that I spoke to representatives from junior high school, university, and community college to get different perspectives from them on what they experienced through this. And the two questions I was pushing on were not only the question of what was your experience during the COVID problems, the COVID days, which continue, but were more extreme, as we all know, earlier. But as we move away from it, what have we lost and what perhaps have we gained? And by the way, I said that, I think it already indicated that the giveaway is the people I spoke to felt more was lost than gained and will continue to be lost over a period of time. So let me go through the results of the interview and my own kind of wrestling with them as we went on. And you know, one of the things I had to keep coming back to in my own mind is how long did this go on for? I mean, I lost track. I don't know about you, but where we were in time. And, you know, starting in March 2020, and then the fact that it happened pretty much over a weekend that we all found out life is not going to go on as usual for some period of time. And things closed down and all the things that we experienced began, and I lost track of time. What happened with school teachers that I spoke to from the Kalamazoo public school system was that it really was a shakeup for them on that Friday the 13th in March. And the one high school teacher I spoke to, as she was leaving the building, said, well, when do you think we'll be coming back? And the principal, I believe at Loy Norrick, said, that's a total unknown. So it was as she talks about, it was a frightening situation for her, besides her own perhaps fears about COVID, but much more so, what are we going to do about school? And I think a pretty much total space of uncertainty was pervading the thoughts of teachers at that point as they moved out, tried to take home what they thought they would need, realizing as they went out that they might not even be able to get back in the school on Monday to get materials, and that's what happened. I don't remember exactly how long that period lasted, but it was at least a couple of weeks where nothing was going on. And then certainly well before June, but things were set up so that assignments were able to be delivered. I do not believe there was any real movement towards setting up the online system to the extent certainly that it was after the summer for the school year beginning 2020 through 2021. But so it was shock and then a sense of, okay, what do we do and what are the possibilities that we have? And what are the equipment that we're going to have because we're going to be teaching from home, and that period of time in which they were going to teach from home, that was uncertain too. Anyway, it was her diagnosis of the situation was similar to another middle school teacher's, that the year was very difficult. Zoom was not like being in person. There is so much that goes on in an educational system that demands personal contact, and perhaps the younger you are, the more important that is. And these teachers that I spoke to were teachers well known for their concern for students. So when they looked back on that year where all the teaching was done online and they had to work out schedules, it was the hardest year they've ever taught and the one with least positive results. And one of the reasons that one of the teachers pointed out to me was the people I was working with, the kids that I had been working with, my schedule changed, and as it always did. New kids came in, but those new kids I couldn't meet in person. I would only be able to meet them online, and that's different. And then she also pointed out to me, as others did, that when you're trying to use Zoom or other methodologies like that, and some of you as teachers have had that experience during the last year and a half or 2 years, that the kind of contact that you have with the students is so much different, partly because, this was true in the Kalamazoo public school systems, the kids could just turn off the camera. And there was absolutely no ability. I know this teacher would have liked to have eliminated that, had some control over that, but that was not in the teacher's control. That was up to the kids, whether they wanted to show their face or not during the year. And that created problems. So this particular teacher, I guess both of them that I spoke to in the Kalamazoo public school system, were just so happy that things came back to normal. However, normal wasn't normal for a lot of these kids, and particularly on the middle school level, because so much academic time was lost, so much academic achievement was lost, and the middle teacher especially talked about the fact that this is not something that's going to be cured in a year or 2 years. Kids are behind. And with the testing system and the kind of Band-Aids that are being put on that, that isn't quite going to do the deal for them. University teachers I talked to, and were again, and the community college teacher, saw the same type of difficulties that I've just mentioned. But they also saw some other things that they mentioned. One was, and the community college teacher I spoke to said a lot of teachers did find that not coming into the college gave them more time to use, as it would give the kids more time to use. And so there's been certainly has been a kind of I shouldn't say certainly, but a little bit of a rush to say, I would prefer to take only those virtual classes in the future, because I do better with those with the students. The person I talked to didn't really believe that was the case, but they're able to do that at the community college because they found themselves having more time. A lot of the students who were at one point anxious to take classes there, are finding if they can navigate a virtual class, they aren't on the spot as long. And so he's very concerned about that as a habit that's been developed because of COVID. So again, not optimistic about that. I did talk to all of them as a possible plus. What about the use of technology? As a result of what they were forced to do, aren't teachers able to be more technologically skillful and be able to use it better? And there was some agreement with that. There has been some learning that's gone on, and I could develop that later in more specific detail. But it doesn't outweigh and is relatively small from these people's opinion, the 5 or 6 I talked to, compared to what you might expect if that was gone after as a principal goal. We're going to develop the technology skills of the teachers at this school. He also felt that there's an overestimate, the community college professor I talked to, an overestimate of how much technological skill students bring in. We figure they know everything, at least I do, but they know how to use cell phones, and they know how to hook up with things on cell phones, but they aren't necessarily the same things that are going to benefit them academically. So I paint a rather depressing picture in some ways. The people I talked to, though, were not depressed. People that were just downers. In fact, they were enthusiastic about what they're doing, about sticking with it, about generally teaching classes face-to-face. And I think that's a tribute to the fact we have an awful lot of good people in the school system who have gone through a very terrible time. So that's my beginnings. Okay.
Thanks very much, Frank. Now I'll call on Connie, who's going to talk. Hope I have it. No, that was me.
Hi, I'm glad to be speaking at Torch tonight. Unfortunately, I'm not as good as Frank is at delivering my speech. I may have to read a little bit. I hope you can all understand that. So I did a little bit of research on the role of the media to support an idea I had. I think basically that one of the reasons that vaccines aren't happening in this country is a lack of education. So let's just talk about the media today. We used to get all our news and entertainment via TV, radio, newspapers, and magazines. Today, the internet is gradually taking over. Websites and blogs are rapidly emerging as major channels of communication as more and more people seek news and entertainment online. Social media pages are how communities interact and share content. Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram, that shared content is opinion many times. Opinion can equal false information. The news media role. Lacking a fully funded U.S. public health infrastructure, the media has taken on a public health role. They have been getting information out to the public, stated noted panelist Beth Blower. We're having to rely on the media to get the right information out to the public. According to AMA President Susan Bailey, doctors and the medical research community partnered with the news media to deliver information about the COVID-19 pandemic. While news reporting helped disseminate messages about shortages of personal protection equipment and public health mitigation practices, U.S. political timing has complicated the clarity of these communications. Perspectives from the Federal Reserve Bank St. Louis revealed media coverage has been the object of coverage and analysis itself. Coverage is often political, with outlets from one side of the political spectrum routinely accusing the other of being politically motivated in their reporting. You think? So, what the media needs to get right in the next pandemic. From the start of the pandemic, health officials made questionable calls amplified by the media. First, some officials told us the flu was more of a concern. Then we were told not to buy masks. There was a shortage. Journalists struggled to accurately convey scientific uncertainty. Instead of trying to present the answers to questions like the origin of COVID, they should report the facts, and that they do not have the answers. This reflects a journalism trend we see now, a focus on viewership, not facts. There we go. In journalism and mass media, sensationalism is a type of editorial tactic. Events and topics in news stories are selected and worded to excite the greatest number of readers and viewers. An economics professor at Dartmouth College noticed the COVID-19 television coverage almost always seemed negative. When cases were rising, news coverage emphasized the increase. When cases fell, coverage focused on places where cases were rising. When vaccine research began showing positive results, coverage was downplayed. He and two other researchers created a database of COVID coverage from every major network. The data was analyzed with a social science technique that classifies language as positive, neutral, or negative. The results showed that U.S. coverage had been more negative than other sources, including scientific journals, major international publications, and regional U.S. media. The researchers say they're not sure what explains their findings, but they do have a leading contender. The U.S. media is giving the audience what it wants, sensationalism. It gets more viewers. So even though Americans are skeptical about internet technology and social media platforms, despite this, the public appears positive towards the role that social media has played during the coronavirus pandemic. A Gallup survey focused on the coronavirus situation part of the Knight Foundation's Trust, Media, and Democracy Initiative, is a nonpartisan commission exploring causes for the erosion of trust in democratic institutions, in particular the press. Findings: 70% find public officials' posts helpful. We want to hear from the public officials. Over half of social media use remains the same as before COVID, so nothing's changed. People are still looking to social media for their information. 74% see social media's importance in staying connected during the pandemic as important. I believe that the education can come from public service campaigns, and we've all seen them, and supposedly there are public service campaigns out now. I wasn't very impressed. Public service announcement campaigns can help structure messaging. When the message is complicated or ever-changing, a campaign can address the volatile information. People come to expect information from a controlled source. That used to be the news, not anymore. What distinguishes persuasive PSAs from weak ones is their ability to elicit an emotional response while still requiring the viewer to understand the consequences. Here are some memorable messages, I'm sure. Well, before I show the memorable messages, let me show you a couple of the PSAs from the CDC. So, if I can get this to play, my little, come on, buddy, get down there. No, it doesn't want to do it. There is no audio with this PSA. I consider this the lowest common denominator. In advertising, we don't consider this good. We target niche markets. We go in and we decide who we want to talk to, and then we speak to those people. This is simplistic. And it isn't giving much information that isn't already overwhelmingly out there. This next one's a little bit better. This is a reality TV personality and a doctor.
COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Millions of doses have already been given in the U.S., and these vaccines have gone through the most intensive safety monitoring in U.S. history. I tell my patients to get facts from a reliable source like cdc.gov.
It's starting to get there in that it is a trusted TV personality that's speaking. It'll speak to a certain market. So, as I said before, what distinguishes a memorable is ability to elicit an emotional response. And then here are some I'm sure you all remember.
Okay, last time. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
How many people remember this? Okay. I didn't even need my PowerPoint to give this presentation because the headline is as memorable as the visual and the audio. Okay, that's a professional advertising agency that produced it, of course. So, Partnership for a Drug-Free America ad began airing in 1987. The heavy repetition was responsible for the ad's longevity. An article by Jay Rosen stated it ran all day for 3 or 4 months. That's because the partnership didn't have any other ads to play. It simply filled every spot. And it appeared to work. In 1990, the partnership announced that market research indicated 88% of teenagers believed even occasional use of cocaine was dangerous, up from 78% before the ads began airing. Here's another one. Sure you remember this one. Show of hands.
Why don't you come up here, Pumpkin?
What are you doing, Larry?
Well, Vince, I've asked my pumpkin to sit on my lap to prove a point.
And what is that, your Larryness?
Even if we fasten our safety belts, even if you hold on tight, even if you were watching the road, in a crash, your pumpkin will be nothing but a squash.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Use child safety seats.
We love that little pumpkin to pieces.
So, the Crash Test Dummies seatbelt education campaign motivated a large majority of states to enact laws mandating the use of safety belts. In 1990, the campaign was recognized with a Gold Effie Award from the New York chapter of the American Marketing Association. By 1994, seatbelt usage had increased from 14% to 79%, saving an estimated 85,000 lives and preventing more than 1.5 million moderate to critical injuries. I have one more ad to show you.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.
Keep America Beautiful, a public service announcement, had a powerful effect on the American public. First airing on Earth Day in 1971, the two-time Clio Award-winning campaign created by the Marsteller ad agency represented a change in how we treat the environment. Bill Conrad's deep, resonant voice and the sorrowful face of a Native American created an indelible impression. He was Italian. According to the Ad Council, the Crying Indian campaign led to a nearly 88% reduction of litter in 300 communities in 38 states, as well as in several nations. This PSA had a powerful effect on American baby boomers and early Gen Xers. My opinion, PSAs would be a good start in educating the public. We trust info from public officials, and we get our information from TV and the internet, like YouTube channels. I think that this is something that should be considered, because certainly the CDC and they're really not doing a very good job with PSAs, in my opinion. And that's my presentation. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Thanks, Connie. Jack, if you would take over.
Well, I'm not going to read. I'm going to just consult my notes. Well, I think what I'm going to talk mostly about is my personal experience as a local politician, which is quite different from what I imagine state politicians and people who hold national office have to experience. They're much more concerned about marketing and about image, about getting reelected, and they're not necessarily. Well, I better not generalize anymore in that regard. But I think I'm kind of a little bit unusual in that I wasn't trained as a politician. I didn't study anything in those fields as I was in my younger career. What I quickly found when I became a county commissioner is that trust is everything. These people that are your colleagues, no one picked them except the people. There was no boss who says, I'm going to match so-and-so with so-and-so because they'll go well together, they'll balance things out. I need somebody with this Myers-Briggs type to help us on this aspect of it. No, these are individuals who are elected by their own constituents from their districts, and they were able to garner a majority of votes from that segment of the population. Now, I find myself having to work with people I've never worked with before who have vastly different educational and life experiences. And I have to communicate with them, and they have to communicate with me. And the people who had the most trouble as county commissioners were the ones who were the poorest listeners. The ones who had the next most trouble were the ones who were the big talkers. Those who came elected on a platform that somehow was appealing to the voters at that particular time forced them into a box that then they had to kind of navigate within to want to be true to their constituency that elected them, but really did not encourage these particular elected officials to step outside of that box. The risk for them was too great. One of the unofficial jobs I had when I was a county commissioner was to try to very gently lead some of the more intractable commissioners into being a team player. If it was, since we all had such different backgrounds, when it came to very key votes, there's almost nothing we could do at the time of deliberation that would have changed a person's vote. There's so much that has gone into the thinking about how they're going to vote that your eloquence will not change their mind at the last minute. All that work has to be done beforehand. I remember, just for an example, now this isn't directly dealing with COVID, because a lot of my involvement in public life was pre-COVID, but a lot of the insights I'm trying to convey to you apply to any situation that's new that public officials have to deal with, because they're not experts. They depend on the experts, and they depend on the voters and the voters' turnout are depending on on you, even though you're not an expert. If you say misleading things and get the public riled up, you can cause a lot of damage. You can cause key staff people to resign. You can get them to just leave to go to other communities. It almost happened in Kalamazoo when because of the Proud Boys. We almost lost the city manager because there were a couple city commissioners who thought that somehow they'd felt betrayed, and they were going to have that person's head. There would be no telling how long it would take before we'd find another city manager of his quality and his ability to find good talent and develop it. It's a rare, rare skill. And so I didn't have to name any names, and they're not actively involved in the commission currently. But it seems to me that what's tying all this together is trust. Trust between the elected official and his constituents, but more immediately, it's trust between your fellow elected officials to show how quickly that can be lost. Once there was a vote at the county commission on whether the county would cover abortion charges as a part of their medical insurance, and it was the commission at that time was 11 folks, and there was 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans. So the Democrats needed all the votes that they could get to keep it from being a tie or worse. One of my fellow Democrats, who sat right next to me on the dais at the county commission, as we sat down before the meeting began, I asked him what his stance was on it, and I just through my own talking about it, got him to understand my point of view, and he voted in favor of having the county cover that. Well, my colleague on the other side of me, who belonged to the other party, had talked to that same gentleman down in the parking lot 15 minutes earlier and gotten a promise from him to vote his way. Come up to the meeting, had the vote. His vote changed the outcome. But from that point on, no other commissioner wanted to have anything to do with that person. That person we felt, could not be trusted. He just didn't keep his promise. So who knows? Is that a vote you're going to depend upon next time? I don't think so. The gentleman was quite elderly, and he was probably of questionable mental state, but it could have been anybody. I would say that being a local politician requires skills that a lot of people don't understand, are just not aware of until they actually get the job. And a big one that is affecting us right now, I think, at both the city and the county, is a number of younger commissioners feel that somehow, in order to gain the trust of the people, they have to be critical and suspicious of what the staff and the professionals and the bureaucrats that are employed by the city or by the county are doing. That is very, very destructive to morale of the staff, and it's also breeds distrust between the constituents and the commission as a whole. If you're skeptical, you have to get your questions answered before the meeting begins. Do not attempt to get the fact that you don't understand something and you have to reveal that to the public shows that you haven't done your homework. And we just saw that example of that last Monday, in fact. And so, as an ex-public official, I would say that there's an obligation to be dependable and to be prudent that goes far beyond what people normally think of as required in ordinary life. And when we don't have it, we have the kinds of trouble we're seeing with COVID now, is that the public officials have a hard time giving a consistent story. And since COVID began with the city commission, there has been a lot of pushback about not having meetings in public, in-person meetings, because they said you're denying the public access to the public officials. And so several people were quite strong about that. Every time there was a meeting that they could call in and give some input, they would complain about that. That somehow that's making it easier for the public officials to operate in secret. but there are public officials who have children who couldn't even be vaccinated yet, who are being subjected to whatever effluvium is in the room of who knows how many people if there's a contentious issue around. And frankly, I could see both sides of this thing because I know how valuable person-to-person contact is at these public commission meetings. Even if you don't say anything at the commission meeting yourself, in public, you have a time before the meeting and after the meeting to talk to your commissioner. They have a chance to talk to you. If you're on a Zoom meeting, if you're on a Zoom situation, that chance is gone. So most of us welcomed going back to meetings in person. We have these barriers between us, on the dais, and there's claim now that actually that interferes with air circulation, and it probably may even do more harm than good. So it's hard to know. We're all in an area a state of unknowing, and we're not used to uncertainty. The digital world tells us to be either yes or no. Everything is yes or no. It starts with, it seems it becomes that's how we think, polarized. But the beauty of living and being involved in life and being a public official is, for sure, is what goes on between yes and no. All the nuances and all the subtleties and all the little things that really kind of come to bear on it when you see the thing in totality. That's the fun part of being a public official. And that's what kept me going. So I don't know if I answered your question so directly about COVID, but I wanted to share with you what it's like to be a public official in these times. So if you have questions that I can answer during the panel discussion, I'll try to do what I can.
Okay, one here. Yes. Okay, thank you so much. I guess I'll open the floor for questions. Oh, yeah, Len, immediately.
Why didn't the pharmaceutical industry take more responsibility for advertising the vaccines?
I do not know. But This Is Your Brain on Drugs, that was developed based on a $300 million grant at the time, and that's why there was only one that was done, and it played so often. So really, no one is going to believe COVID or believe Pfizer. They're going to believe the public officials. That's what that Gallup survey was about.
Every night when I watch television, Pfizer is advertising some drug which has no known use, but is
I don't know why.
needed by everybody, and they seem to sell those drugs.
I don't know why it wasn't advertised. I think because it was controversial, and this is just my opinion. I'm not, I did my research to do the talk. Pardon? No, but I mean, I agree. I think there should be a PSA campaign, though, and it. Right.
Exactly. I think that was what I heard, because I think there were a number of people asking that question. That was what I heard, was this is not something that the drug companies are going to make any profit on because they're selling it at contract price to the government. Yeah, they did. Oh, yeah, an exclusive buyer.
See, like vaccine, Pfizer also has this drug which is rather effective for early, mild, within the first 5 days when you have a positive test. Mm-hmm. This is the protease inhibitor. Very effective, actually. 90% prevent the admission, and almost 100% prevent death if you get it. Mm-hmm. But have you ever heard Pfizer come on television saying anything? Because they already sold 10 million doses to the government for $500 a dose per person.
Mission accomplished.
billion they already gained. Why should they spend money on television and talk about this?
Yep. In fact, I think, and I mean, don't quote me because I'm not certain, but I think at least in the early days of the vaccine, the contract did not allow Pfizer to sell to anybody else. I think it was exclusive to the government, at least in this country. So, I mean, you're right, Connie.
And who knew people wouldn't get a vaccine? We've all been vaccinated. Who knew this was going to be an issue? I'm finding out with work I'm doing with Jack down at PMN.
Well, I have some friends who have decided that they're not going to get the vaccine, and they're really kind of reluctant to share with me why. But if people don't want to get a vaccine, you can't make them. You know, that's, I don't know how we could force that. Now, at one time we could make people join the army, but we can't do that anymore. And the thing about Pfizer advertising a vaccine, it's possible that I'm just going to put this out there as a question. Is it possible that due to the overhyping of questionable drugs of questionable use for older people by the drug companies, that if the drug companies should all of a sudden start to be advertising a vaccine, given the history that we know about from the syphilis study in Tuskegee, they say, well, why should we trust you on this? You know, that damage was done 2 generations ago, but it's handed down from parent to child to parent to child. A lot of that's the stuff that's going on that that troubles our nation is stuff that parents hand on to children, and the children maybe not have had any direct experience, but they listen to their parents. The parents are their only world when they're very young, and that's a very powerful influence.
Yes, something I'd like to add is that in a conversation that I had with GIllian, maybe a year and a half ago, GIllian recommended a book. We were talking about viruses and these different plagues and things, and she said, well, you might be interested in a book called The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett. So I ordered that book, and what was marvelous about the book is that each individual chapter is of a different plague or pandemic, and when I first got it, it was like 900 and some pages. So I thought, oh boy, this is going to be a little bit of work for me to kind of make it through. I literally couldn't put that book down, but that was pre-COVID. But one of the things that was so instructive for me for that book is that I was more fascinated early on was that what these diseases were and how they were discovered, and then how they came up with ways of treating it. That was all fascinating, but the theme through each of those chapters, no matter what plague or pandemic it was the complications by culture, belief, by government, by bureaucracy that put all sorts of barricades. The science, when you read this, the science was pretty straightforward, that they could track this stuff down and come up with a vaccine or whatever it may be to treat it, but getting that done was, almost an impossible task in many cases. So I would highly recommend that book. Again, it's called The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett. And I mentioned it to GIllian. I thought, oh man, I sure hope she has a sequel to that when we can understand this COVID. But the psychology and the human behavior behind this is far more paramount than just the pandemic itself.
And I would just like to add that nobody made people stop using drugs. Nobody made them buckle up. Nobody made them stop littering. We convinced them to participate. And that's what a PSA does. It convinces people and educates people.
Terry.
I think we should have a conversation about the attempt to redefine the word freedom that Trump was a master of. The freedom to not be vaccinated, the freedom to stand up for your individual rights, and how he manipulated and abused that whole concept that we were educated in our civics class about what freedom meant to be an American. We never questioned what that meant. And I don't remember any disagreement in my house about the polio vaccine. I was just told we had to get it and line up in school, and we got it. And this whole politicization of mask wearing and vaccines, and it's my individual right. 6 months ago, maybe it was 9 months ago, my first indoor restaurant experience was at the Coney dog place on East Michigan. And I sat at a counter with empty stools on either side of me, and took my mask off when my hot dog came. And about 4 stools over from me was a man, and he said, "A mask, seriously?" And I said, he said, "Have you had COVID?" And I said, "No. And this is my first restaurant experience." He said, "Well, I've had COVID." He said, "It's just like the flu."
Oh my.
And I said, "So you haven't been vaccinated?" "No, I would never get the vaccine." And this is, a Kalamazoo native, I later found out. Very nice guy, very corrigible. But he said, "You don't know what's in that vaccine." And I said, well, it's Jack's point. I trust the science. I trust what I've been reading. He said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a retired professor." And he said, "Oh." And that was the end of this conversation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
But I mean, this whole issue of the whole redefinition of the concept of freedom, I think, has done a tremendous amount of damage.
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
But you don't want to engage people in a fight. This is not solving it.
No, as Sue just asked,
Yeah,
Sue
Jeff,
just said I
yeah,
should have
you're a
asked, do
mediator.
you know
You're
what's in
better
your
to
hot
start
dog?
fights.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what it does, right, for bias.
Well, speaking to Jack's point of trust, another thing that would have happened if the COVID had happened 20 years ago is that someone in the local paper, when it was viable, would have called up GIllian and said, "Okay, how many cases do we have here in Kalamazoo County? What do you say to this reality?" And we would have had a conversation that dealt with our local situation, so there was more of a feeling of trust. The further away you get from the source of information, the less comfort people have with it. So I think the loss of local media is a health issue.
Yeah, I agree.
So since someone brought up politics, I don't think you can assign the negative to one side alone or the other. We had 2 national candidates, one who ran for president and one who ran for vice president, who said, "I would never take a vaccine produced by that man," meaning Trump. So there's this battling that occurs. Both sides are guilty of that. So to simply asymmetrically assign such a negative responsibility, I think, is somewhat disingenuous. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. Human beings, will anyone here who is not flawed please raise their hand? Okay, so now we're all being honest. So we as people are flawed. And Jack, you mentioned something. I was wondering if anyone was going to bring it up. You know, I follow the CDC website during the pandemic, and the racial group, or a racial group, that was least vaccinated for a considerable amount of time was the black population in the United States. Precisely, I would bet, because of the Tuskegee experiment. And when I went to the gym, when we could get back to the gym, I have a few friends at the gym who are black, and I asked if they were aware of that. Oh, yes. You better believe things like that they're aware of. And all of us have our own individual human experience through our families, like you said, handed down, or among peers, etc. And, you know, having served in the military, I had to go through, I don't know how many times they whacked me in the arm with a needle when I first joined the Navy, but that was a requirement. You mentioned the idea of freedom of choice. When you volunteer for the military, my friend Dave here will confirm this, you cede certain constitutional rights. Okay, that a lot of people, there's only 1% of the population that serves in the military these days. Okay? So when I heard that there were military members refusing to get vaccinated, I said to myself, you are wrong. You volunteered and gave up certain rights that you were made aware of when you volunteered. I was too. And so, you know, and yeah, I'm fully vaccinated. However, I do support the citizen's right to choose. The sovereignty of the individual is pretty deep in our history. Now, people come from different positions, and we have all kinds of it. It goes across the spectrum. Homeopathy, what is it called? Homeopathy?
Homeopathy.
Homeopathy, thank you. That kind of doctor. I did a little looking up on that, and apparently in that field, they don't promote vaccines. And that, I think, cuts across the political spectrum. I think you'll find Democrats, Republicans, who knows what political venue or participant that medically resides in that area. So I think we have to be careful not to be oversimplifying in looking at something like, why is it that certain people didn't get vaccinated? How many people here know of someone who had a severe, very severe reaction to the COVID vaccine? Who do you know? That's correct, me. After my second COVID vaccine, I ended up in the ER because my blood pressure tanked to below 80/40 for the next hour. And they transported me to Bronson ER. Okay? And in spite of that, I still encourage people to get vaccinated.
You know,
Can I just say something?
Yeah, you say
Yeah, a couple of specifics. What I didn't understand what you were referring to by the president and vice presidential candidates and their attitudes towards vaccine. I missed that entirely.
Okay, so when no, I'm referring to Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris when they ran in the 2020 election.
Yeah.
They said I would never take a vaccine produced by Mr. Trump during the election period.
They said they never take a vaccine to what?
Produced by
okay,
Mr. Trump.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So-
they took the vaccines that were produced by Mr. Trump.
Eventually, yes, but during the election period, that's what they were campaigning
Okay,
on.
the vaccines weren't out yet at that
Correct.
point. Okay, I'm sorry.
Correct.
I'm sorry.
But who was
Excuse me.
responsible for getting it done so fast? Even
yeah.
a professor
Well,
at
sure.
Harvard wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal saying,
Gotcha. Okay, the other thing, the one other thing that I wanted to talk about. Both of you have brought up the Georgia, the syphilis, Tuskegee. And I don't want to say I'm an expert on that, but I did make a point, because this was important to some of the other stuff I was doing, to try and find out why was the black population less apt to take the vaccine than otherwise. And the kind of polls that were taken on that with the black population seemed to certainly indicated to me that that was not the case. It may have influenced a very small minority of black people, but was not the reason why they refrained.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
I know I just want to make one comment and then we'll go back here again. And in response to I have a right not to take a vaccine, I don't have a problem with you have a right not to take the vaccine. But if you choose to go in that direction, you do not have the right to infect anybody else that you come in contact with. That is my right to be protected. So I think we have to be real careful when we're talking about freedom to do something or not do something, as long as you do not impinge on anybody else's safety or health. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry, I know that there's a couple of questions in the back there.
I've had both vaccines and also booster shots, but as a child when polio was so prevalent, I vividly remember when I brought home a note from school to have the polio vaccine. My father refused to sign for me to have the vaccine. And the reason he gave was they are still largely in the experimental stage. We don't know what's going to happen to you after having this vaccine when you're an adult. And not many years ago, I read a book about the polio vaccine, and in that book about Dr. Salk, they stated that in the early stages when they were giving this vaccine in the schools, they were actually experimenting on the children because they didn't know what the effects of this vaccine would be. So, as I said, I've been vaccinated and boosted, but I can understand why some people do not choose to have, in particular, their children have the vaccine.
I was going to say what GIllian said was that, yes, you have the right not to take the vaccine, but then you need to sequester yourself outside the population. The real problem I'm seeing is that we know what happened. We're explaining what happened, but the trouble is the next pandemic is just around the corner. And I haven't really heard any solutions from, not from this group, but from anybody about how we're going to deal with the next pandemic. What are the rights of people to not take vaccines or to go to restaurants or whatever the case may be? And we still haven't dealt with that. And I think this is a major concern.
Well, I would like to say something about the state of anxiety that many people are under these days, probably more so than ever. It seems to me that a lot of people, and this might be explain a little bit why Trumpism is so popular, there's a lot of feeling of loss of control in one's life, in one's livelihood, and what's going to happen to one's children, the safety of one's children at school, or from violence or from diseases or whatever. And parents pretty naturally are going to want to try to protect their children, and they're going to protect their children as best they can with what they know and what they believe. And it's very hard to force a parent to go against what they believe is best for their child. And so there's somewhat of a difficulty right there. I think there's so much insecurity that adds to our just general problem on a number of fronts.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jack. I think on that point, we're going to have to stop. I know we could probably go on talking for a long time, but I'd like to thank the three panelists for your views and perceptions. Thank you. And have a great summer, everyone. We'll see you in the fall.
All right, so thank you very much, and we are adjourned till September. Thank you.